welcome to our Advocacy in Europe panel. My name is Katja Kowalski, and I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Officer at VoltFast, the London-based drug policy think tank. And today I'm joined by advocates from Finland, Germany, and Italy to discuss the state of progressive policies in Europe. The European market's quickly developing for medical cannabis and CBD, and recently we've seen a real wave of normalization and legitimization of cannabis. However, significant barriers still remain. And Europe's a particularly interesting playing field to navigate, particularly with various ideologies, and each country is at quite a different stage of their cannabis reform journey. And adult use and cultivation for personal use widely still remains criminalized and stigmatized. And although there's been legislation changes, patient access still remains widely difficult. An individual and internal development for European nations is a real important way of legitimizing and normalizing cannabis reform. However, with that said, it's really important that advocates continue to discuss ways in which communication across Europe can be harmonized and streamlined. And today's panel focuses on Finland, Germany, and Italy, each country at quite different stages of their cannabis reform journey. And although cannabis remains legal in all for adult use, and there's still kind of significant challenges for regulation in all. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists for today. So first up, we have Cole Thomas, who is representing Finland. He serves as the vice chair of the Helsinki Greens and is running in the Helsinki City Council elections this summer. Cole hosts his own podcast and is an avid advocate for drug policy reform in Finland. And he's also recently published his own model for the regulation of cannabis, which I'm sure we'll go on to discuss today. Our second panelist is Georg Wirth, who is representing Germany. He is the leader of the German Cannabis Association, DHV, which is one of Europe's largest organizations calling for the regulation of adult use and medical cannabis. DHV has a huge social media following with over 160,000 likes on Facebook and 180,000 on YouTube. And Georg was the first cannabis lobbyist to speak to the German Chancellor Angela Merkel about reform. And our final panelist is Pierluigi Gagliardi, who is representing Italy. He is the project assistant of the Meglio Legale campaign, which is the Italian campaign for the legalization of cannabis. And Pierluigi graduated with a BSc in political science, and he's currently attending the Erasmus Mundus master's program in public policy. So today's discussion will focus on the recent European developments in each of your countries, the persisting barriers that remain, both public and political support, and what some of the next steps for progress are. Now we'll go into the panel discussion, but if our audience has any questions throughout the discussion, feel free to pop them in the question and answer box, and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can towards the end of the panel. And Cole, Georg, and Pierluigi are all members of the European Cannabis Advocacy Network, or ECAN, which is a network that VoltFast runs. It's a bespoke communications platform for cannabis advocates to keep each other informed about recent cannabis developments. So without further ado, let's jump straight into our panel. And first up, I think we should discuss some of the recent developments and the current situation in each of your countries. So to all of you, what is the current status of cannabis policy and reform in your countries? And what have been some of the promising prospects for reform in Finland, Germany, and Italy? So perhaps Cole from Finland, could you tell us a bit about the Citizens Initiative to decriminalize cannabis? What's the progress on this, and how is this kind of moving forward?
Thank you very much, Katja, and thanks for the really good introduction. I'm really happy to be here today, and greetings to everyone from sunny Helsinki. So we had this Citizens Initiative in Finland. I was not part of this initiative, but this initiative gained over 50,000 signatures, which is around the 1% of the Finnish population that is required for a Citizens Initiative to be discussed in Parliament. It revolves around the decriminalization of personal use. And it's currently being discussed in Parliament. We've had expert hearings on it, and there are more hearings to come. The Finnish national health experts, along with other types of experts that they've heard, agree that this that decriminalization should happen in the context of cannabis. But they have also gone further in stating that we should not criminalize the use of any illegal drugs and should move towards a more more welfare health focus in our drug policy instead of the criminalization that we have right now. Unfortunately, I don't see the citizens initiative that calls for the decriminalization of cannabis, personal use of cannabis. I don't see it going forward. We don't have the kind of political backing that would need, which is why I've started to make a push for a more regulated reform that would be more fitting for the Finnish context. So the progress is still to be seen, but the discussion in my country has definitely been kicked off by this citizens initiative that gains so much support. Thank you.
No, yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, so I think there's some real exciting developments happening in Finland. Now, kind of moving on to Germany, Georg, obviously Germany is quite developed in terms of medical cannabis access, but adult use is still kind of a difficult field to navigate. And I think there's particularly some harsh regulations around THC levels and driving. So what have been some of the developments around this, and how is DHV involved?
Well, let me first say the general situation in Germany is a little bit on hold because we have general elections in autumn. And so think about a Germany without Angela Merkel as main face. It will be somebody else then. And that makes up not much development at the moment. You are right, the driver's license issue is one of the most important things in Germany for consumers, more than the usual penalties for having a little bit of cannabis on your pocket, because you can really lose your driver's license very easily. And we are discussing this since years, and one of the main driving factors in the discussion as German Cannabis Association, when we had a campaign in 2018, putting together some papers about it and so on, and bring it to the politicians. We had a hearing this year where I was as an expert. And there's another hearing of experts in 2 months. And they asked me to get there and have a one-on-one discussion with somebody else. But still, our traffic minister is also from the Christian Democrats, and he is stopping every development. Although the administration, what is in charge of the issue, also says, well, our border THC border in blood is too low. We can take more without safety problems. But well, let's wait what happens after the elections. I think also the driver's license issue will get some movement then.
Thanks, Georg. Yeah, I mean, there's some real exciting developments happening in Germany. I think a lot will kind of hinge on those elections, which I'm sure we'll kind of go on to discuss in further detail. And Pierluigi, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about the situation in Italy, the work that Meglio Legale is doing, and some of the civil disobedience initiatives you're involved in.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. And thank you very much, Katia, for this introduction. I'm very glad to participate in this panel on behalf of Meglio Legale. Well, if you ask me to describe the current situation, the current status of cannabis reform in Italy, I would probably say is a kind of stationary, stuck, at least is not moving forward as we wish. We need to say that Italy remains the second largest market for medical cannabis, and there are 6 million consumers of cannabis every year. It's almost 10% of the population, but their requests are often ignored by the institutions. And so for this reason, last year was the 20th of April, we launched this national civil disobedience, and it's called Io Coltivo, I Grow. And we were inviting citizens to cultivate cannabis at home on their balconies, which actually now in Italy it's illegal. But this was possible because last year there was a sentence by the Corte di Cassazione, which is a judicial body on the Italian jurisdiction, which actually sentenced that it's not punishable, the personal cultivation of cannabis at home. And of course, we asked participants to some requirements. For example, we asked them to be of legal age, so to be older than 18, or to cultivate only one single plant, and to post their action on social media and using the hashtag Io Coltivo, I grow. And we were very glad that actually 2,500 people decided to join. It was a very big national disobedience. And we offered free legal assistance to all the participants in case they were stopped by the police. And we're very happy that actually we can get involved even 70 members of parliament. And 3 of them were even stopped by the police with some cannabis plants in front of the parliament. And this was very good because actually we could raise the attention of this issue. And for many of them actually were just a kind of protest or national disobedience. But actually for many patients who actually are cultivating their cannabis at home, this is more about their right to treatment. And this initiative is still going on. And we think we will never stop until the Parliament will finally vote on this law and we can finally get this right to treatment ensured for these patients.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, you guys are involved in some incredible work and yeah, incredible progress in just slightly over a year. And yeah, and I think the situation in Italy is really interesting because it's such a large medical cannabis market, but there's kind of this paradox not being able to access medicine. So I guess moving on to some of the persisting barriers that you all face in your countries. Obviously, there's some incredible progress being done with the European advocacy, as you guys have all pointed out, but cannabis reform still remains kind of a barrier-filled sector. So I think if you guys could touch on what some of the current barriers are in your countries, and I think particularly discussing some of the unique barriers in your respective countries, like what makes cannabis reform particularly and uniquely difficult to navigate in Finland, Germany, and Italy. Yeah, so whoever would like to speak first, the floor is yours.
Sure, I can go. No, if no one else is going first. So the unique barriers, I'd say one kind of unique aspect in the Finnish conversation when it comes to regulation revolves around the fact that well, we used to have prohibition of alcohol back in the early 1900s, and then since then, well, we started regulating alcohol, and it's slowly become more liberal, but we still have a state-run alcohol monopoly for alcohol drinks that contain over 5.5% alcohol. So a lot of times when people think about how to regulate cannabis, they want to think of how can the government have a monopoly over regulating cannabis. Now, I don't especially agree with the fact that we should have a government-run monopoly or that the government alcohol monopoly should take over selling cannabis, but that's maybe like a unique Finnish or Nordic trait because we do have government-run monopolies for alcohol. Now, the barriers in my country mostly revolve around the stigma around cannabis and how it stifles public discussion. I'm one of the few politicians in my country that has the courage to speak about this topic. Even in my own party, in the Finnish Greens, people don't want to talk about this because, well, we do have city council elections coming up, and city councils don't decide on cannabis legislation, so it makes sense not to talk about it. But this is an issue that no one has talked about for decades. And for example, Green parties across the European Union do support legalization and regulation. Like, for example, in Germany, the German Greens are polling as possibly the next biggest party in the country. I'm sure our German colleague is very happy about that. Possibly, I mean, having a party polling as the biggest that wants to regulate, that's good news, not just for German regulation, but for regulation across the European Union. So in my country, the biggest problem is that people are afraid to talk about this. And the biggest voices in the choir, so to say, are the prohibitionists. And the leadership of the Finnish police force and the conservative politicians that represent them in parliament, they're the loudest advocates for prohibition in Finland. And they're pretty much the only people that really have the courage to talk about cannabis, but they focus on the Nixonian propaganda based on lies and fear instead of the science that I focus on. But yeah, so like I get a lot of messages from people, whether they're police officers themselves or teachers, or I talk to a lot of politicians from my own party and other parties that would like to talk about this, but fear the stigma that's attached to even talking about cannabis. So I'm guessing this is probably an issue in other countries as well, but it's especially prevalent in my own country. Thank you.
No, that's really interesting.
Maybe then my statement about that fits behind this, because if you ask me what is the biggest barrier in Germany for legalization, it's police. Every time when there's a hearing somewhere, always someone from the police association is there, and always they are hard prohibitionists. And people believe them because they somehow think they are from the field, some kind of experts, but they are just experts in, well, repression, but not in drug policy as a whole. And on the other hand, same direction, something like that, is the question, what is conservative and what is the main crystallization point of a conservative party? As you know, at the moment we are dominated by conservatives, and when they ask themselves what does it mean to be a conservative party, then it doesn't mean much today when we have legal homosexual marriages and so on, but still it's law and order. Law and order is the main brand thing of the conservatives in Germany. And then they say, well, that's doesn't fit into this image to legalize a drug. So we must, our job is to convince them that what they do now is more like a law and order show, and they have to decide if they want to just stay at the show and doing all the police hassle thing and spend a lot of money for it without any positive impact, or if they really want law and order, and then they must legalize and get all the criminals out of business and regulate the whole thing and put some rules on the market, which is completely free now. So, well, this is our mission in direction to the conservatives. And if we are lucky, well, we don't need that anymore in autumn.
Thank you, Georg. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like both Finland and Germany have kind of similar persisting barriers, and you've got people in power that are strongly opposed and kind of suggesting that prohibition is the correct way forward, when we need more people to discuss the benefits and why reform is necessary. Pierluigi, would you like to discuss?
Yeah, I was thinking actually, like Germany and Finland, we also have the same barriers, like lack information or political ideology. But actually, we have something more, unfortunately, something I want to ally, and it's the Italian bureaucracy and how it's denying the right to treatment for these people. And I write that should be guaranteed by the constitutions. Like today, there are thousands of patients in Italy. They have their pathologies and they are treated by medical cannabis. But despite having a right and also having a medical prescription, these still have a lot of difficulties in finding the cannabis in the pharmacies. This depends because we have a structural insufficiency of the quantity produced in Italy. In Italy, the national production of cannabis is entrusted to one single authority in Florence, and this authority can only produce around 500 kilograms of medical cannabis. And the national requirement, it's about 3,000 kilograms. So it's 6 times what would you produce. And beside the shortage, of course, this means that it's impossible for them to go to pharmacies and to find some medical cannabis. So it's difficult for them to keep their therapy. And besides the shortage of cannabinoids, there is also high reluctance of doctors to prescribe medical cannabis for their therapies. And also we have in Italy a kind of differentiation based on the regional regulations. For example, refer to the right to treatment and the access. For example, in some regions, it's free to have medical prescription about cannabis. So to go to the pharmacy, it's provided by the state. In other regions, you need to pay only for some pathologies. And in other regions, it's not free. And as you know, it's very expensive. And for citizens to have cannabis every month, it can cost up to 1,000 euro. And so the only solution actually for these patients is either to cultivate cannabis at home, which is illegally now, or to go to the black market. And of course, we try to avoid that these people go to criminal organizations for treatments that should be provided free of charge by the National Health Service.
Yeah, no, it sounds like an absolute paradox in Italy, especially as the medical cannabis market, I think, is the second largest in Europe. And yet, you know, there's very limited access. And I think it's very interesting and bizarre that, you know, different regions have different levels of accessibility. No, yeah, really interesting. If we move on to, I find this kind of section really interesting around public and political support for reform, especially kind of perhaps the kind of juxtaposition and the difference in public support versus political support. We've already kind of touched on this slightly over the course of the discussion, but how does the public perceive cannabis reform in each of your countries? And would they encourage change? And kind of how is this or isn't this reflected in political support? So is there a desire to reform publicly that isn't necessarily represented by the government? Yeah, I'd be quite keen to hear what the political landscape looks like. Perhaps, Georg, obviously the German Cannabis Association has done quite a lot of public opinion polling. So perhaps you could talk about what public support looks like, and then a bit about political support, especially with the Greens currently leading in the election polls.
Yeah, all right. We are lucky that we are able to make such kind of polls since 2014 every year. Maybe for the activists, it's interesting side information that it's about 1,500 euros now per question for each question you ask. When we started, was more like 1,000 or 1,200. Now it's more like 1,500. And I can show you some results. I hope screen sharing is going to work. Do you see anything on my screen?
Yep.
So I start 2014. What you see here is we started with a general question. What do you think about war on drugs, the worldwide war on drugs? And here you see it's almost 80% saying it's not very successful or not at all successful. And just 19% say, well, it's a little bit of a success. But that doesn't translate into legalizing opinion. So here there's the question, do you want to legalize? First year 2014 was 30%. Later, more about that. But this is interesting. Medical cannabis has been 2014 already on 82%. People saying, well, that's a good idea. So 2017, a few years later, we had our German law without any protests about it or something. So this was a no-brainer for politics to put this through. So let's go to the next year, 2015. I show you only one thing. We had another question and asking, do you believe cannabis is going to be legalized in the near future? And a majority said yes. 51% said, I believe cannabis is going to be legal in a couple of years, while only 42% said 2015 it should be legalized. So even a lot of the conservatives who don't want cannabis to be legalized do think it's coming. So this is an important thing to know if you talk to those politicians. And even the members of parliament of the conservatives think little bit like that. There you get them. If you want it or not, it's coming anyway. So let's talk about how to make best out of it. Now I go to 2018. Another important thing is, what do you think about decriminalizing? Not complete legalizing, just let the consumers go with some grams. And this is here 59%. So quite a majority saying that's a good idea. Let's leave the consumers alone. And 1 year before it was 51 or 2%. And after that we stopped asking. This seems to be also a done deal. Then last one here, full legalization. I said before 30% in 2014, then going up to 46% in 18 and 20. Not much going up anymore, but just a few points from the majority. So soon we've got it. And you ask about political support. That's about the same. It's going hand in hand, let's say. We have now about these 46%, let's say, support for legalization in the parliament, with the Green Party, the Left Party, the Liberals, all for legalization, and the Social Democrats on the coming up, like divided half and half. And so we are short before getting through on legalization, and we have a majority in parliament already for decriminalization. Just the conservatives are the problem. They are the government at the moment, and they can put a hold on the whole development. So much for now, and to the next. And well, try to find you back and put this off. 1 second.
No, but that's really interesting. I thought it was super interesting how even those that are opposed to legalization still think that it's coming, which I think is just kind of a sign of the times, and it's continuing to grow. And I think, yeah, particularly it will be interesting to see what happens in the federal elections in the autumn. Are you having trouble pausing your screen recording?
Yes. Well, can you go ahead with my failure here? So I will
right on the top. Maybe there is the Zoom icon. You can click on that. On the top.
Yes,
on the right.
I just don't get back into the Zoom frame here at the moment.
I think if you click on Zoom Cloud at the bottom, maybe, but I'm not sure. I'm not.
It's not at the bottom. That's the problem. Well, however,
well, we've got some lovely
you talk,
graphs.
people see you, right? So then just go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, those graphs are really interesting, and I think that kind of data is super valuable to kind of understand the current situation in Germany around public and political support. Perhaps Pierluigi, you could tell us a little bit about what the existing data looks like for Italian support for reform, kind of around decriminalization, and both kind of, are the public in favor of reform, and is that or isn't that reflected in kind of current law?
Yeah, sure. I mean, unfortunately, I don't have your very nice data on decriminalization. But what we have is actually that every year, every day, actually, patients and consumers are writing to us to write some complaints when they clash with bureaucracy and Italian law. And I just want to tell you this story that just happened a few days ago, which raised the attention of the media and actually is demonstrating how the failures of the Italian legislature. And we were being following this case, this patient, his name is Walter De Benedetto, and he's suffering of rheumatoid arthritis, and he's almost 40 years old. And this disease, for those who don't know, actually forced this man to lay on the bed, and he was treated by medical cannabis. But as I told you before, there is a lot of bureaucracy and problems, and like Walter, like thousands of patients in Italy cannot access to medical cannabis at pharmacies. So in order to keep his therapy, he was forced to cultivate at home. But unfortunately, he ended up on trial because of detention for purpose of drug dealing. And he risked like 20 years of prison. And we consider like ridiculous and absurd that a man just for cultivating his medicine was risking a trial. And it was like the state's fault, like not to provide him the right to access, the right to treatment and his medicines. Anyway, I'm very happy and glad to say that on Tuesday, Walter was released, was considered innocent by the judge, who actually see that the cultivation of plants in his house were linked to their therapeutic use purposes. So it was for his therapy. But the problem is that the case is not even closed. Like there are thousands of people like Walter, and there will be even more if the law does not change. But the good part about public support is that this story actually made people realize that this dragon wars is just fake. It's just going against the most fragile, the weakest one, by leaving in Italy the criminal organization free to act alone in their monopoly and without any problems with the police. And I'm very happy that actually people are starting to realize this, and they were able to join us and to rebel against this system, which is completely unfair.
Yeah, and I think I mean that's such a tragic story, and I'm glad it's ended well. But yeah, there's so many more excuse me, so many more patients just like Walter. And sorry, my voice is going. But I think what's interesting is that kind of these kinds of stories are what pushes legislation and reform forward. It's that kind of human side to it that really makes the public and politicians kind of change their views.
Yeah, I would say that stories count much more than numbers. Like you can bring a lot, how many patients we have, or how many money legalization would bring in a country. But when you see this face and you see how a man is suffering because of a fault from the state, there are no numbers that can count for this.
Absolutely. I think as much as evidence and numbers are really important, I think sadly, in the grand scheme of things, it sometimes does little to convince people, but that this kind of human side of things is what kind of pushes reform forward sometimes. But Cole, you've kind of already touched on this around the public and political appetite for reform in Finland, but do you think that the Citizens Initiative has been a door to opening up these discussions? What does the public think, and what do politicians think?
Thanks for that question. I just want to first touch on what Pierre was talking about, like those stories that he just shared from Italy. They're happening all around the world, all across the European Union, also here in Finland. Since I'm one of the few voices that is in any kind of even relatively prominent position in Finnish politics, which I'm not really anyone here, to be honest, but I talk about this, and I talk about the problems that prohibition causes, which has caused a lot of people to send me, private messages talking about the issues that they have faced and how they have been, victimized by the system of prohibition. And this story of, people growing their own medicine and then facing prison sentences because of that. I literally shared a story like this on Twitter yesterday because a person sent me a message that the police raided his house when he was growing not even cannabis with high THC. It had less than 1% THC. He just wanted it for the CBD, and now he got a fine and is facing some sort of prison sentence or something. Ridiculous stuff. So we need to end prohibition to help medical patients as well, not just to regulate the use of cannabis as an intoxicant for adults. But when it comes to the public opinions in Finland, we also don't have the same kind of data that George was showing us. By the way, George, can you send me that data? I can come up with a lot of good Twitter rants around that stuff. Anyway, but there was some polling about this back in 2018, which is already a few years ago. There's this one poll that found that 42% of Finns support decriminalization. Now, legalization, the support was somewhere around 15%, something like that. Like, the problem in Finland, though, is, like I said already, that we have never had proper public discussion about this. There's also issues that people probably are afraid to say that they support legalization because of the possible stigma that can be attached to it. And the political support is also very limited. Oh, before I go into the political support, one way that you can measure support, now this is not a scientific study, I'm a sociologist, I know, but when you read the thousands of comments under Finnish news articles on Facebook, on Twitter, when you go out on the street, like I've been campaigning on the street, when we can and how we can, even, under the pandemic, talking to people about politics on the street because we have city council elections coming up. The support for legalization, especially in Helsinki, especially among people like under 40, is tremendously high. People want cannabis to be legalized, taxed, and regulated. Now, the political support is not there. There is no party in Finnish parliament that currently supports regulation. Not even the Finnish Green Party that I'm a member of currently supports regulation. That's something that I'm trying to change, and most likely, hopefully, whatever, will be able to change in the party congress this year. That will be coming up this fall. We have an initiative that we're going to pass. Our party does support the decriminalization for the use of all illegal drugs, and we support a comprehensive study on the possible implications that cannabis regulation would have in Finland, which is a good policy to have in our current debate. But we should move forward like other European Green parties and all kinds of political parties around the world that have, sided with the science on this topic and want to see regulation. But the public support, I believe, especially after the Citizens Initiative, has probably changed a lot because it's opened a lot of discussion and people have really seen how ridiculous our current system is and would rather see cannabis, taxed and regulated than just be completely unregulated in the free illegal market that it is right now. But this kind of popular support that I hypothesize here, it is definitely not seen among politicians because politicians are afraid of the stigma they can get if they talk about this. Thank you.
That's really insightful and interesting. I think the particularly important point that you made at the beginning around, legalization and regulation is important for patients. It's a war on drugs in terms of kind of everything, and I think it's especially with cannabis reform, it's very difficult to kind of separate out medical use and adult use, recreational. It's just it's extremely nuanced and it's a lot more difficult than kind of just separating out the two.
Yeah, the war on drugs has become a war on the people that use drugs, and that's where he's failed.
Absolutely, and on patients. So it's but that's really interesting. I think the kind of that it seems that public opinions are continuing to grow in Finland, but that's not being represented politically. And it's interesting. I think that the citizens' initiatives kind of brought forward this platform for discussion and kind of and promoted public debate. Now, if we move on towards our final kind of discussion point for the panel before we move on to some question and answers, I see we've got a couple of questions, but I'd like to discuss next steps. Obviously, we've discussed quite a lot around support, barriers, what the current situation looks like. So given all that we've discussed, do you think that there's significant changes on the horizon? And what are the most important steps to advance reform? So the kind of floor is open. Whoever would like to take the floor first. Cool, go for it.
Yeah, sure.
Oh.
You want to go up here? Okay, sure. I'll go first. So what I want to see next is not just in my country, but all around the European Union is a proper discussion on how to regulate cannabis. We should be past the point of whether we should do it or should not do it. We have to do it. So we have to talk about how to do it. Because of this, I came up with my own model for how to regulate cannabis. Now, if you want to read this entire model, you can go on my website, colethomas.fi. You can just Google my name, Cole Thomas with regulate cannabis, and you'll find my model. Now, I'll go through quickly what I talk about there. I go through the logic behind why regulation works and why prohibition doesn't work when it comes to minimizing societal harm. My regulation model itself has 9 + 1 parts. I look at how production, sales, and marketing should be regulated and what kind of limits regulation should entail when it comes to things like age limits, limits to possession, and home growing. In addition, I call for the decriminalization of all drugs and for expanding support services like mental health care and substance abuse treatment, which could be funded from the new tax income from cannabis. Basically, it's a strictly regulated free market model, something like a fusion of the Colorado cannabis laws and Finnish alcohol laws with a lot of influence from the model that was overturned in the New Zealand referendum. But yeah, I also talk about the tremendous economic impacts in implementing this type of model, not just for the market of intoxicating cannabis, but also for low THC cannabis. I probably don't have to go into the details of how the prohibition of cannabis makes it more difficult for businesses in the CBD market. Probably not in this event, people know. Anyway, I also go into detail what the social harms are of cannabis prohibition. For example, how it's easier for young people to get illegal cannabis, how punishments create social exclusion, inequality, how medical cannabis is harder to get, and how police completely waste our resources. Ultimately, my goal is to achieve cannabis regulation under a similar model like this in Finland within this decade. But the illegal cannabis market is international, so regulation should also be an international issue, which is also why it's been so fun to come to talk in an event like this. But anyway, check out, if you want to see my model, Google my name, Cole Thomas, cannabis regulation, or regulate cannabis, and you'll find my model. And please steal my ideas, use them in your own country, please. Thanks, you.
Cole. Yeah, everyone should check out Cole's model. It's super informative, very easy to read and understand. So yeah, awesome job on that. Pierluigi, would you like to speak next around some of the next steps?
Yeah.
In Finland or Finland,
actually, next, Italy, Finland, which only 3 countries here. Don't worry. Yeah, I want to talk about like the next step for those who are listening. Maybe they are hoping that Italy can be something good example. Like right now, there is a kind of reform on decriminalization of home cultivation, but also on the minor consumer cannabis for minor purposes. And like in Italy right now, it's quite difficult because we have a formation of the national government unity with so many parties, and it takes so little to create a confusion. But actually, we organized a press conference to get this bill approved, and 5 parties decided to join. And this actually means that there is a majority in the parliament who will be able to accept and to approve this bill. And for this reason, actually, now it's stopped, and the Justice Committee of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, and with other associations, we are trying to push this bill forward, and we launched a petition to the president of this Justice Committee and to its members. We reached like 20,000 signatures, but the good fact is that the president actually replied to us, and he spoke how to be in favor of this bill. And now we are waiting for the scheduling of the bill, and then it probably will go on the final stage, which is the voting phase and one of the chamber. And it actually can be something very big, because actually Italy would be the first country to legalize home cultivation, to fully legalize, of course, like not like in Spain, but even much more. Of course, this is not like what we aim. Is we know that it's not a full legalization like what we like to do. Like our association's name would suggest like better if legal, but we know that based on the less short period of time that we have in the legislature, this can be, as Cole said, something like to spark the debate and start to talk finally on cannabis reform in Italy, maybe starting from the next legislature. Yes.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a stepping stone and a step in the right direction. So yeah, if it could be fully legal to cultivate, that would be a massive step forward. And Jörg, would you like to touch on some steps?
Happy to be back in the frame here. Yeah, I think there is going to happen something quite soon after the elections, and that's mainly about three things. One of this is the driver's license issue I was talking about before. One part of it will be to find another THC border level, however. And the other thing, which is my goal to get done quite soon, is that still German police is making giving information to driver's license offices if they catch consumers with little amounts by food on the streets somewhere. They get you with 2 grams of hash, for example. You are not in a car, you are just walking, and they still give the information to the driver's license office, which is even for the Christian Democrats and so on. I think I can explain them. That's like if you go buy food out of the supermarket with a bottle of beer and they are telling this to the driver's license office. They understand that. And the rest of the driver's license issue is more complicated to explain them, because they always say then, we don't want people to drive stoned. And so it's a little bit sophisticated. But this issue, like if you are on foot, that doesn't have to do anything with safety in traffic. And I think there's going to happen something soon. The second thing is local model projects, like giving cannabis to 500 or 1,000 people in a city and have a scientific view on it and make some research how the outcomes are if you do that. That's discussed quite a long time in Germany. We are pushing this since 20 years or something, because it's the most far-reaching thing politicians can decide in lower parliaments like cities and Bundesländer regions. And that makes up the pressure to the federal level. It's a little bit like in the States where the single states go forward and making pressure on the federal level. A little bit like that. It's also in Germany. We have more and more cities who want to legalize and make such kind of decision. And the third thing, maybe the most interesting here in this panel, is decriminalization. The Social Democrats want it, and every government will discuss this in autumn, even if the Christian Democrats are still leading the government, but probably this time with the Greens. That will probably be something where we see changes. But then we have to discuss how to decriminalize. And the Social Democrats, for example, are big fans of the Portuguese model. And I think in most of other countries in Europe and the reform debate, it's also, let's look to Portugal, let's look to the Portuguese model. And in Germany, they are only discussing this about cannabis, mainly. And then maybe they have a little simple view on this, on Portugal, and say, well, it's not punishing people, maybe just a fine, not a criminal case. And you are forced to go to these panels with social workers and so on, and they look if you have a problem or not. And they want to do that with cannabis. And we have more than 200,000 cases with cannabis every year at the police, more than 80% against consumers. and that's more than 180,000 cases. And I don't see where they want to send them all to check them. We don't have so many social workers in Germany to do that. And we as Hemp Association are also not convinced that it's necessary to let people pay fines if you want to decriminalize them. We would think it's better to really decriminalize them and let them alone with a couple of grams without any case, without any penalty, and let them keep the cannabis and just let them go. That is maybe the most important discussion we have here in the next couple of months, because it's going to be concrete outcome probably soon.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all develops in Germany. And I'm aware that we're short on time. We've only got about 10 minutes left of our panel, and we've got a couple of questions from our audience. So I'm going to try and kind of amalgamate some of them and see how many we can get through. So we've got a question from Neil around the regulation of cannabis laws in the US and Canada. And he's wondering whether this will kind of whether you think that this will have an influence on your respective countries and reform, in each of your countries. Would anyone like to touch on that and answer that? Yeah.
This is a very important development. You can't put this high enough, because it makes a discussion that was completely in theory before Colorado made this first decision in 2012. People said, well, there's going to happen terrible things if we legalize. All the youth will smoke the whole day, 24/7 and so on, and they are going to be wrecked completely, the whole generation and so on. And now we have these concrete data flowing from all these US states and Uruguay and Canada, and people can chill and say, see, well, the world is not going down. So, and also with the international treaties, before they all said, well, it's not possible. We can't legalize cannabis because of the international treaties. And now I can say, well, forget it. If Uruguay can do it, why can't Germany? And that's, I don't hear that argument anymore. So it's very important, this development.
If I can touch on that as well, in addition to Uruguay, we can talk about Canada, that is usually very respectful towards the international order when it comes to international treaties. So that argument doesn't work anymore. I really like George's point about decriminalization. I see it also as a necessary step, but it's not enough. Decriminalization doesn't allow us to control how cannabis is sold, how it's marketed, how it's produced. It doesn't allow us to tax it. So regulation is the only way we get the tools to do that. So I think we should jump over decriminalization and go straight to the regulation part when it comes to cannabis. I'll try to answer some of these questions. Is it okay, Katja, if I answer a couple? I'll try to go fast.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I can see them on my screen here as well. So I agree with George that the American progress has helped us as well here in Europe, because we do live in this, especially here in the North, we live in this kind of like Americanized culture, and we get all the news from America a lot, and we see the data. So definitely that's helping the struggle here as well. One person asked if there's any plans to join forces to lobby at the EU level. That's kind of what we're doing here. ECAN is a European network, but unfortunately, or fortunately, either way you want to look at it, the regulation of intoxicating substances, whether it be alcohol or whatever, they're usually a national issue. So regulating cannabis will always fall to national parliaments. Now, in the European Union, there shouldn't be any attempts to stop that progress, but I don't really see that there's a way that we can speed it up that much either. Yeah, and then there was also a question about how to talk to people like friends and family about cannabis reform when they clearly have stigmatized, misinformed views. What I always do is I talk to people and I ask them what their concerns are, and their concerns are usually very very normal. They fear increased drug use. They fear increased problems. They have all kinds of fears what might happen. But the science doesn't back the fears that prohibitionists have. That's why I created the website that I have, not just to come up with this regulatory mechanism, but also to address the fears that people might have if that was implemented. So I go into detail about, I do talk about what harms cannabis causes, but I also talk about the harms that prohibition causes and how it makes the possible negative health effects of cannabis even worse than they would be. Read my website, get some facts, and talk to people. Like, it's important that you talk to your friends and family who do hold views that favor prohibition. But yeah, now I answered quite a few questions. I'll let someone else talk. Thank you very much.
No, thanks, Cole. That was really insightful and informative.
I'm sorry. If I add something based on what Cole is saying about this question, is that actually we are trying to do in Italy to transform, as Cole said, is that always like some kind of negative, the perspective of cannabis. We're trying to transform in a positive aspect when talking with members of parliament, even like family, friends, but also at higher levels. Like when they say, let's start a war on drugs, so let's just eliminate cannabis. We are just saying to them, or families or friends, that actually it's what criminal organization want, because if cannabis is illegal, they will keep the monopoly. But if cannabis is legal, we can prevent consumers to go to the black market. We can ensure their health instead of having like harmful substances. And also when they say, okay, so let's then eliminate the whole cannabis in this world, we say that's what the United Nations tried to do many decades ago, and actually failed because it's kind of impossible. And more or less, it's very expensive. We have judicial proceedings which are very slow because there are so many crimes related to drugs because of these laws. And this is a kind of burden for the state, for considering the police enforcement, the courts, the tribunals. And what we need to say is like try to transform this conservative narrative in explaining why it should be good for economic or health reasons and for justice.
Thanks, Pierluigi. Yeah, I mean, I think we should probably wrap up the panel there. I know there's a couple of more questions, but hopefully we answered as many as we can. But yeah, I'd like to thank the three of you for your insights and sharing your expertise and just your very interesting views on the state of cannabis reform across Europe and your countries. And thank you for the audience for your questions and for your kind of interaction. So yeah, that concludes the Advocacy in Europe panel discussion. Hope you all enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of the CBD Live conference today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.